Karin Brandt is the CEO and founder of coUrbanize, a suite of online tools that help manage information and communication for real estate projects in 31 states plus Canada. She's also an adjunct professor at Buse Metropolitan College. But Matt's going to start us off with our first question.
So we were just wondering if you could first talk and walk us through your early education, career, and your journey in founding coUrbanize.
So fast forward to I'm studying city planning at MIT, and the reason I studied city planning is because I love cities and I love change in cities, and that's what really drives me, creating change in cities. And when I got out into the real world, what I saw is the place where change is decided are these public meetings. Has anybody been to a public meeting? Okay, well, if you go into real estate, buckle up because that's your future, is going to a lot of public meetings. But what I saw is that oftentimes, and the data backs this up, the people who go to public meetings are older, richer, and whiter than the communities that they're supposed to represent. And so this political process of public review that happens at meetings, it's supposed to be democratic, is actually very undemocratic. And what happens is change is opposed. And it's very frustrating. I saw some of my colleagues from planning school who are so passionate about creating more sustainability, affordable housing, increased density, better outcomes for disenfranchised communities, so frustrated that they were leaving the field altogether. And I wanted to stop this. So I started iterating, prototyping, talking to tons of people in this space, talking to city planners, talking to community members, community organizers, learning how to code. And I was working through different prototypes of different startup ideas. And I had this aha moment when I reached out to different alumni and I was having calls with them who were real estate developers. One of them was a real estate developer of affordable housing. And she said to me, I'll never forget, any data we have about what the community thinks before we get to the meeting is gold. That was my aha moment. I knew that that would be something that people really needed and that they would pay for. So for me, it was, how do we find something that's broken, that's really painful, and then how do we create a solution around that? And I can speak a little bit about how I approach that. So I started prototyping what different solutions could look like based on the problems. And what I would do is I would email the head of development at Boston Properties and say, so-and-so recommended I talk to you. I'm an MIT grad. I'm looking at this problem and working on solutions. And I just listened. And I asked people to tell me about some of the problems. Tell me about the last project you did. What went wrong? Tell me about one of the worst projects that went sideways. Did community opposition stop your project? How much did that cost you? And I heard so much. I learned a ton. People love to talk about their problems, especially to some unassuming young grad student. So I heard stories about city councilors doing under the table deals with their attorneys. My sister's charity needs $10,000 here, this and that. And it really frustrated developers. And ultimately what they wanted was the same thing that cities planners wanted, city officials wanted, and the same thing that community members wanted: better communities for everybody. And so we really worked with them on creating a solution for this. And ultimately that led to coUrbanize, which is a community engagement platform. And the whole idea is that two things. One, we can bring more people into the process. So instead of going to a Tuesday night hearing at 7:30 in City Hall, you can actually just take 1 minute on your sofa, on your phone, and learn about a project and add your idea and make a big impact. So we can bring more people into the process to do that. And then the second is we can have better data about what people really think that's more democratic and more representative, and we can take that data to the city to get our projects approved faster. So that's the premise of what we sought out to do, and that's really what we've done. I can share some examples and case studies, but that's a little bit of a founding story.
Got it. That's awesome. Thank you. It sounds like misrepresentation in those meetings was a big problem you aimed to solve. Looking back to sort of the early development of coUrbanize, would you say there were any pivotal moments or challenges you guys had to face and overcome?
Well, one of the very first challenges that we had was we'd worked with a lot of the top real estate developer owners to build the platform and get their feedback. And when I would ask them what they needed to buy it, they all told me something similar. They said, I need the city to endorse it. I need the city to say that we should use this. And we had to unpack what that meant. So just as a startup, one of the things that I like to visualize as a startup is you have this big pile of risk on the table, and your job is every day to take pieces of risk off the table to de-risk it. And that was a really big piece of risk that we needed to unfold. And this was back in the day under the Menino administration, and it was a very top-down development environment at that time. So we went and talked to people in the city, and we talked to the new urban mechanics, which is like the innovation entryway into the city. And I went to them and I said, okay, I've got this problem. I need to do some type of pilot with this city. Which department would be interesting that I can get a pilot off the ground with quickly? And they connected us with the Boston Bikes department. And they were a lean, mean department. And they said, yeah, we are just launching this new bike share program. And we need community input on where the bike should be located, but we don't have any time to do meetings or to do surveys or anything. So they're perfect. We can help you get some community engagement on that, but what we'll need from you is press and a quote from the mayor endorsing coUrbanize. And we did that. And so once we had that, then I could go back to, I could send the press release to the developers and go back, and then I invited them to be our first paying customers. So that was like one of the big pieces of risk. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, got it. So it sounds like gaining traction and sort of a reputation was very important. When would you say, like in your timeline of coUrbanize, I think, 13 years now, when would you say the like sort of breakthrough moment was that you guys got enough people to endorse you and sort of started to grow at a higher level?
Yeah, I feel like there's been different moments throughout. It's been just 11 years.
11. Sorry, I misread.
You know, I think a couple that stand out for me are when we've had the opportunity to work on some really big transformational projects that have made a big impact and pushed our company to be better. And a few that stand out for me are, we worked on the City of Detroit's first citywide sustainability program. That was really exciting to be a part of. There's a lot of underinvestment in Detroit, a lot of marginalization, and to give people a voice who had really lost trust in change there was really powerful. We also worked with the City of New York in Brownsville, which is a neighborhood in Brooklyn that's largely NYCHA housing, on the future plans there. That was really tremendously impactful. And one of my favorite projects is a little bit more recent. We worked in Queens, in Astoria, which is the most diverse zip code in the US, with Silverstein Properties on a $2 billion redevelopment. It included a lot of affordable housing, and we had lots of engagement. I think over 3,000 letters of support initially for the project, and it really came down to, in the City of New York, most development is as of right, except for the few projects where you actually require a zoning change goes through the ULURP process, which is the equivalent to the Article 80 process in Boston. And most owner developers in New York City always go by right instead of going through the ULURP. And after this project, Silverstein said, we will never do another ULURP project again. But it was really intense. It comes down to a city council vote. And They had overwhelming data that the engagement had been equitable, it had been meaningful, they had changed the plans based on community input to provide more affordability, and that really helped them get over the edge to get that project approved.
Got it. Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah, so we recently heard from Sheila Dillon, Boston's chief of housing, and she mentioned a lot of the challenges in the Article 80 review process, as you just mentioned in New York with the similar program. So is there any way that coUrbanize has specifically been able to streamline that? I know you talked briefly about some of those projects and how you can access those people remotely who can just chime in for a minute, but I was wondering if you could maybe tell a story of something you found really impactful that coUrbanize has been able to facilitate.
Yeah, absolutely. So just as quick background, we work across the US and Canada. We've now worked in 40 states. California is our largest market. If you talk to any company, most people will say California is the largest market because it's the largest state. So Boston is a smaller piece of our core portfolio of work. We've done a lot in Boston. It's a big market for us. And I'm excited to see Sheila Dillon champion that change because it is very slow. We see, compared to other places, development is just easier. It's less costly to go through the entitlement process. And we really have a housing shortage here in Boston that's very serious and very concerning. So I'll say one example. In my neighborhood, I live in Jamaica Plain. Another favorite project of mine. Right at the end of Forest Hills, Criterion Development was proposing to do new affordable housing, new residential housing, multifamily apartments with an affordable component. And there was this really great comment exchange where an artist in my neighborhood, she's well known, she made a comment and said, how about you include some artist-designated affordable housing? There's a lot of artists here in JP and we're getting pushed out because it's too expensive. And the development team said, they replied to her, interesting idea, we'll look into that. And then a few weeks later, they replied back and said, hey, we just met with the BPDA about this, and it's something that we can adjust our plans to include. Thanks for improving your neighborhood. And we reached out to her, Lisa, and she was like, I had no idea. I just was sitting on my couch typing this. I didn't think that they would actually listen to me and that it would happen. And that's just like one example of how impactful it can be. But we had so much data about the conversation that had been happening on coUrbanize in that project. And the BPDA project manager said this was the largest project that he'd ever worked on that didn't have to have a second hearing because the conversation had already been had. He had all of the data reports. Everything had been wrapped up with a bow at the first meeting, so the project could move forward. And that's really important in the economy because things only get more expensive, and when things get more expensive, then the budgets that you have no longer are viable. It's also really important because you're paying your lawyer, your architect, for all of these meetings that they're attending. So it's just many months. If you can cut 1 month during the entitlement off the process, it can be $5,000 saved. In the Bay Area, our clients tell us that it's closer to $1 million every month in cost. So time is money.
Absolutely. Is there anything that you think that Boston could do beyond what it's currently doing and what coUrbanize is doing to kind of help meet the demand of affordable housing from your experience, obviously? You're 11 years in the industry.
Yeah, I think a really interesting example is across the river in Cambridge, where we also do a lot of work. They have an affordable housing overlay where different zones are designated that you can have a very redacted by right approval process to get shovels in the ground faster to deliver much needed affordable housing. One of the last times I was here at BC, we were talking about Boston's 2030 plan, Imagine Boston, and that was also the goal of that they would be able to designate zones that we could fast track development and approval. And things just take a long time in Boston.
Thank you.
Got it. So when we were doing our research, we found online you published that you have a 92% positive or neutral feedback, which is much higher in contrast to many of the traditional community engagement strategies. So what key features, you mentioned all the access you guys have to data. Are there any other features that coUrbanize has that you would say results in this 92% positive rating?
Yeah, so Catherine Levine Einstein and her team of researchers at Boston University did a really interesting study where they looked at all of the public comments made at meetings, and they found like two things. The people who attend are overwhelmingly whiter, older, and richer than the communities that they represent, but they're also overwhelmingly more negative. Only 15% of the comments were actually in support of housing. So that's 85% opposed. On coUrbanize, we use sentiment analytics, natural language processing, and like you said, it's 92% positive or neutral across our cohort of work. And the reason that is twofold. One, we're bringing in what we call silent supporters. We're bringing in more people into the process, and when you do that, you have more balanced sentiment and perspective. And the second thing is, at a hearing, you grab the mic, and it's really of, why are you for or against this? On coUrbanize, we curate questions and comment topics that are more visionary. Like, what do you love about your neighborhood? What would you like to see change? People are adding ideas about retail, saying things that they would like to see change and evolve. They're actually becoming more part of the design process, and it's more collaborative, far before it gets to the, do you support it or not? So we take our clients through a methodology of community engagement that's really designed to help them actually earn trust and then support.
So the question that people are, I guess, voting on or in support of or not, it's just much more well formulated by a larger group of people, would you say?
Can you say that again?
When you said like people are, once they get to the mic, they're either saying yes or no, but with coUrbanize, would you say it's now people are saying yes or no, but with a more well formulated issue at hand?
Yeah, they're more informed. They've been part of the process. There's more evidence that the developer has been listening to them, that their ideas have been incorporated. So they've actually earned trust, which is different.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could kind of walk us through the timeline over development, maybe a traditional development, let's say in Boston, and compare it to something, maybe a project that doesn't use coUrbanize to collect this sort of data. I know you mentioned that just in the painting example, it only required one meeting, where it almost always required two. But I was wondering, just so you could do like a high-level overview.
Yeah, it's always really hard to do this because no project is exactly the same. One of the best examples that I had is we've done a lot of work with Boston Properties. They were really a design partner to us in developing the business, and they were our first customer, and we've worked with them for 11 years. And we've worked with them in Kendall Square for 11 years, so there's been a lot of development there. One of the best examples was we worked on this really interesting project, and this was the first project that we did text messaging engagement. So they were doing around Kendall Square. People have been to Kendall Square. It's like Google's campus. There's a lot of interesting retail there. When I went to grad school there was nothing in Kendall Square. Like 5 o'clock, there's not a cup of coffee, there's not a drink, like that's it, go home. And so there's a lot of workers, and in the summer, we worked with them to create these signs that they posted all around Kendall Square asking people fun things like, what would you like to, like, what would get you to come out here and eat your lunch? Like, what would get you to stay out here after 5 o'clock? What types of like food, retail programming would you like? And people could walk by and just text in their answers, and those text messages created like comments in our platform and got people connected to the process. And within just a few weeks, they got hundreds and hundreds of really great comments and ideas that they were able to deliver on. I think one of the biggest ones was people wanted a pharmacy, which there's now a CVS. So they had all of this data and this comment report from coUrbanize that they took to the city council, and they were able to get it approved in under a year. And when I went to Boston Properties then afterwards, and we were talking, and I asked, like, what's the ROI? How do you measure the return on investment? And they said, we can't. Because after we got approved, a new city council got elected, and this project would never have been approved under that new city council. They would have, at a minimum, reduced the size or just never approved it. The other thing they said was the comparison is MIT, who did a similar big rezoning, and it took them 3 years. And so if you think about $5,000 a month minimum, probably put it closer to $10,000 a month, but then you can't even think about like the size reduction. It's a lot of money saved.
Yeah, and Sheila Dillon gave a figure that it was about $1 million a year for affordable housing, for the average affordable housing project that it takes just in that review process and going back and forth, drawing new plans up and working with different engineers and different attorneys. I was wondering, where do you see the future of coUrbanize? I know you're using AI strategies currently. I was wondering if you see that advancing more as we go into the future or anything else?
Yeah, we're doing a big AI product release right now. Where I see a lot of excitement is around public comment and using AI to sort through public comments. So like, some of our most successful projects get thousands of comments. So we're working on this really big development in Chicago. And if anybody from Chicago? Yeah, it's my favorite American city. I think it's like the best American city. And they have incredible architecture there. So everybody in Chicago knows architecture really well. And so unlike every other project, the comments are all about like architecture and design and like this is the character of the neighborhood. And there's been thousands and thousands of comments. Like within the first week before we even started any outreach, it got 700 comments in just days, doing nothing. Like that's Chicago. So the client is overwhelmed. Like, what are people saying? I can't just read 3,000 comments and understand what are the summaries. So we've been doing a lot of AI to be able to sort through this and determine what is the summary? What are the takeaways of what people are saying and what's the overall sentiment around different topics? And what I see is that cities are really hungry for that overall summary and data. If you're on an approval board, a planning board, a city council, or you're Sheila Dillon, you don't have time to read thousands of public comments. You need to know what's the overall. So what I'm seeing as an opportunity is there is so much development happening in places that haven't had a lot of development before. So to use an example in Boston, where are we seeing development? Like Newton, like in the outskirts where maybe there hasn't been as much big development before, where they have a volunteer planning board. And so they are overwhelmed when there's a lot of controversy and a lot of vitriol around some of these projects. And that's where I think having an automated digital public comment platform can really help.
Thank you. Is there anything you currently see holding back coUrbanize in terms of its expansion towards the rest of the states and different and other municipalities as well? Is it more that you guys are focusing on the ones that with more developed zoning laws and review processes, or is this something that you can kind of be everywhere?
So what I've heard a lot from our customers and investors who are real estate developers say is this is how development should be done. Cities should require that we all do this so that it levels the playing field for everybody. It provides a better experience for community members, and it just standardizes the way that it's done. I'm going to go back to politics because development's very political. You have to ask, like, when a process is seemingly broken, why is it actually broken? Who is benefiting from this? Who's making money from this? And who are we displacing in this process? So yeah, I'm curious if you have ideas. Who do you think is being displaced?
Probably people with the least amount of like control or power, so people like from impoverished communities living on the margins and don't really have a say in anything.
Yeah. So absolutely, and like that's really why we created coUrbanize, to give them more of a voice. But on the flip side, like, who has too much of a voice right now that by democratizing this process or standardizing it is going to lose? Essentially, who's benefiting right now from the broken process?
it's like more wealthy kind of white families or communities are benefiting from an undemocratic process of going to these public meetings, being more informed on when the meetings are. So having more of a voice in these meetings or having more time to attend these meetings is probably making it more of an undemocratic process for marginalized communities who are working 40-hour plus work weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the leaders of neighborhood associations wield a lot of power and influence, and I think they maybe get some kickbacks sometimes, depending on the community, if I can say that. I think there's lawyers or lobbyists or other consultants that, when we work in like some very random small community in California, it's like, okay, there's one lawyer who everybody has to use because only he knows the zoning code and he knows who to have coffees with or who to line up in city council to get something done. Stuff like that.
That's very impressive that you guys are kind of breaking that cycle of those few that benefit, keeping their benefit. But you talked a bit about like NIMBYism and people that kind of thought that not in my backyard, and those are the people who tend to speak up. And now you're getting through these comments people who love the field or want more retail. We were wondering if you could just speak a little bit more about how specifically coUrbanize has shifted the mindset in people who speak up and foster constructive dialogue with communities.
How we foster constructive dialogue with communities. Well, I think generally NIMBYs are very well organized. They know how to show up at a meeting, get people involved, maybe spread misinformation on things like Facebook, etc. And what I think of, we call them silent supporters or interested bystanders. The biggest reason why they don't participate is because they don't think it matters. Like, why should they do that? Is the developer even listening? That's the number one thing we hear when we do user testing and user studies with them. And what I see is that often we launch a coUrbanize engagement platform, people make some comments, and the developer starts responding. And then when those silent supporters see that the developer is actually responding and listening, then they start adding their ideas. And so it takes a few steps to get people from this big capitalist real estate developer doesn't care about us, they're not listening to us, to, okay, they're listening to us, they're incorporating ideas. Actually, I can give them my support. It's a process, it's a step. We are right now working on a couple of these redevelopments of public housing. So public housing is affordable housing that's like government funded and managed. It's the most subsidized. And the problem across the US is that HUD has so underinvested in the maintenance of this housing that it is decrepit, it's unsafe, and they have put out big RFPs for developers to rebuild one-to-one the affordable units, but then also build market rate to create an actually sustainable financial model for maintenance long-term. And we are working on a couple of these. One is actually in Boston, in South Boston, called the Mariel McCormick. It's where Whitey Bulger grew up, fun fact. It's over 1,000 affordable units and an additional at least 2,000 market rate units. And when that project started, Wind Companies, the owner developer behind it, were so forward thinking. Before they even started the Article 80 process, like years before the Article 80 process started, they started using coUrbanize to understand what people liked and what they wanted to change. And people had a lot of issues with the lack of security, like doors weren't locking. There were a lot of real concerns. And I think Win was really present. They really listened to people. They heard their concerns. And what happens in these types of projects is once people start seeing that the developer is actually delivering, it really flows from there. So another similar project is in Winston-Salem, and it's a few years ahead. They just actually built the phase 1. And so People get moved out of their existing homes, the residences get demolished and then rebuilt, and then they get moved back. And this happens over in phases, so these can be 20 to 40-year long projects. And so in Winston-Salem, this project just opened up phase 1, and all of a sudden, the number of followers and activity on their project page dramatically increased. This project has been on coUrbanize since 2020. So like 4 years in, we see this big spike in activity. We talked to the developer and they said, it's because we just delivered this and people are saying, wow, you did what you said you were going to do. This is so great. So I say all that because the life cycles in real estate are so long lasting, it takes a long time.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I guess to wrap up before we open the floor to questions, could you give any advice to possible entrepreneurs out here for creating technology solutions, or maybe there's a misconception that you have to have a business major or a business background to start your own startup? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Could you address that?
Yeah, I think there's two big things. One is that it needs to be a really big, important problem. Like, is this problem worthy for you to spend so much of your energy and time and resources on? Is this something you really deeply care about? And then I think the second is the industry ready for a solution?
Got it. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to open up to questions.
Hi, how are you doing? My name is Austin. I'm a senior here at BC. Thank you for coming in today. I was wondering, it's kind of like a two-part question. One, obviously you're pooling a lot of information from the public and how people really feel about things. How do you build credibility for something like that? Because obviously you have, like you said, 3,000 comments, 4,000 comments of people who are real people who live in that community, but how do you like verify that they're actually people who live in that community? Yeah.
Okay, so one of the biggest barriers that real estate developers face is that everybody thinks they're lying and hiding things. And I remember when Silverstein Properties approached us about this project in New York, they said, listen, like Amazon HQ2 just got shut down here. Sunnyside Yards has been an absolute disaster. Like, people are coming organized and like ousting developers at their community meetings. And I said to them, like, the only thing you can do is not do the same thing that every developer is doing. And they were very nervous that the comments on coUrbanize would be overrun by negativity and NIMBYs. We had so many conversations with them, like, you've never seen New York. Like, we've seen so many things. And the thing that's so powerful is, unlike at a public meeting or unlike on a typical website where you comment into a black box, like, there's transparency on all sides. So we require people use their names. We have like spam profanity filtering. And so people's comments are actually open. If they've followed our community guidelines and aren't slandering, you can say, I don't like this project and here's why. And it's an opportunity for the developer to respond. So when people see that the developer is not deleting comments, it changes things. Wow, this is really different. They're actually listening to us. And then the biggest argument the NIMBYs have is that this developer is lying, they're hiding, goes away. And now you actually have to talk about the real merits of the project.
That's awesome. Thank you. I'll pass it along and I'll save the second part.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for coming out. I was just kind of had a question more about affordable housing, but through your platform and your data gathering tools, have you noticed certain areas or cities of the U.S. that are more receptive to affordable housing? And then I guess on the other end, have you noticed cities or areas of the U.S. that are more against affordable housing or like particularly more against affordable housing, considering, you know, NIMBYism is kind of in every part of America?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. In the last handful of years, affordable housing has quadrupled as a portion of the real estate accounts that we have. And that just reflects the amount of product that's coming online and the fact that the commercial and biotech sectors are so slow. This might surprise people, but I will say that California is much more amenable to it generally. And we've worked on projects in the South or the Midwest, but I think Boston's actually quite difficult. Maybe, we've worked on over 600 projects across the US, and last year, this was the most negative, depressing project I've ever seen, was in Charlestown. I don't know Charlestown very well, but that is a scary place. Yeah, and even Cambridge, I lived in Cambridge for a long time. I went to school there. It's seen as very, very left. Everybody becomes some type of environmentalist or preservationist and like, oh, I love affordable housing. I'm like very pro affordable housing, but the site is just not the right one. In Boston, Roxbury, the argument there is that that neighborhood already has a big portion of affordable housing, so other neighborhoods should be taking it on. But actually, that's the argument that Jamaica Plain uses and Dorchester uses and every other neighborhood in Boston uses. So Boston's hard. I will definitely say that. It's a lot easier in New York. It's a lot easier in DC and in California. We saw a lot of supportive housing projects last year. This project in Charlestown was supportive housing. Supportive housing is housing and services combined for formerly unhoused people. There was insane amount of misinformation that it's all one beds for men. That was not true. And we connected that team with other teams that we have across the country doing supportive housing, and the teams in California were like, yeah, we said we were doing supportive housing, and everyone just said thank you and approved the project right away. What are you talking about?
So my second question was, you talk a lot about kind of dismantling these systems that have kind of been perpetuating for far too long, and a lot of people who are in power kind of like spearheading that control. So now you're giving a voice to people who have been far too long like suppressed and silenced. Have you faced any backlash from that? Are people upset, and how do they go about that? How do you protect yourself from stuff like that?
Yeah, the people who are upset by that are the people who don't want their hold on power taken away. So maybe a leader of a neighborhood organization where, well, if we just have all of the community engagement happen in my neighborhood association with my constituents, my members, then we'll get exactly what we want. But if we open up to everybody else, that won't benefit us as much.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, what is like the most discussed topic that you've seen on your platform, like across the board with the United States?
So I don't think that this will be the answer this year, but at the end of the year, we always look at all of the data and run analysis and AI on it. And was it last year or the year before? One of the most popular requests was a Trader Joe's. Everybody wants a Trader Joe's in their neighborhood, it turns out.
Okay, I actually have another question too. Just based on like expanding like your business, not in the sense of like geographically like to other states in the United States, how do you see like your business growing in like the additional features it can provide like in the years to come, or is that a good place right now?
Yeah, so we're looking a lot at AI right now, not just on the public comment analysis and report generation, but like other products on content creation. So AI to write your summaries of like your project description. AI is really good for content generation when you have a template and you can produce more templates based on that. In terms of other avenues, we're seeing that conversations in general about change are just more controversial. And some of the big challenges that are happening now are more policy oriented, or like wind farms, wind turbines, solar farms. These are also built environment issues, and we're seeing opportunities there as well.
You mentioned that one of like the benefits of coUrbanize is that it gives a voice to, minorities who represent a smaller amount of the population. but you also mentioned that you're utilizing AI to kind of summarize like the general consensus of a certain place. Do you find that those two things like conflict at all? Because the summarized like voice of the AI is not necessarily representing those minority populations, or do you think they work together well?
That's an interesting question. The AI that we're using is very much looking at here's all of the comment data and summarizing it. And some interesting things that we've pulled out are sometimes NIMBYs will make a lot of the same comments again. So we worked with the related companies on a huge redevelopment in Santa Ana in Orange County, California. And the biggest thing that they were hearing at all of their meetings and all of the issues is traffic. Traffic, traffic, traffic. Very LA, right? And we ran this AI analysis, and when you actually looked at the number of people who were mentioning traffic and the number of people who are mentioning we need less parking, they were shocked. It didn't reflect at all what they were seeing at meetings, that the number of people commenting about traffic being bad was actually far less, and the number of people who were saying that they wanted less parking was far more. It's just that one is so much louder than the other. So I don't think that AI really concerns me there, because it's just looking at the number of comments and the data of comments. There's ways to get around, like one person might write longer comments or write more comments that can be distilled.
Awesome. Thank you.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Based on like sustainability and stuff like that, does your platform see more support for things like solar farms and like wind farms, or do they see more like backlash against it? And then like what areas would you say are more like backlash or for these kinds of things?
So we haven't done enough of this for me to really confidently say, but I'm from the Midwest, so I have a big opinion on it. A lot of this work is in open field area, where the whole agricultural industry has changed, where it's too expensive to farm unless you have a mega farm. So a lot of these types of smaller farmers, family farms, have now been able to sell their land and make a big profit and move on. And so that's where a lot of this development has historically taken place. So it's almost no controversy there. But now the next frontier is that it's happening in other places. I was recently in Philadelphia, and we saw so many solar panel farms outside of the city. And we're seeing it here in Massachusetts as well. The big fights are going to be the wind turbines. And there's some cases outside of on the Cape, Rhode Island, that are very big. And I think that's where it's going to be super controversial when it gets closer to the shoreline.
Thank you.
I had a question. As like an entrepreneur, what does your day-to-day life tend to look like?
Generally, as an entrepreneur, there's a lot of ups and a lot of downs in a day, every day. And so that can be disarming for people until you get really used to it.
Thank you.
I have a brief question more about the structure of coUrbanize. Yeah. You mentioned a lot of use of AI, and I was wondering if you kind of gone in on specializing, bring that inside, or if you partner with certain industry partners to facilitate this use of AI. I was wondering how you see that changing over the next decade or two as AI becomes more of a common thing.
Yeah, I think there's different levels of AI. How we're using AI is not like, we're not building rocket ships right now with AI. We're doing comment analysis, which is pretty accessible, relatively speaking. So yeah, we have somebody on our development side who's very into like data analysis and AI, and he really spearheaded the design and development of our new AI tool. But I've learned like how to communicate tech requirements and product requirements in a certain way that I can provide the user voice or the customer voice, and then the engineers can figure out the best solution for that, because that's not my area of expertise. I will say, though, that something that's helped me tremendously to just be connected to AI is being part of the conversations and using the tools myself quite a bit. I use ChatGPT regularly. When I was teaching, I used it a lot. I could tell if my students were using it in their papers. So I do think using the tools helps you connect with the vision of where they can go for your product.
Thank you so much for your time, Karin.
Thank you.